Lenny, I
Good
can't hear
morning.
you. Oh, good.
Welcome to the morning show. Uh, I'm Leonard Duncan, your host. I have Joe Tolle from ATV On Demand and Ed Textera from Textera Tech. Thank you, Ed, for joining us. We really appreciate that. Joe, as always, it's an honor. If you guys would let me do a little bit of housekeeping here real quick, we'll get started. I need to thank GBC Tires for always helping us out and making it so that we can bring these shows to you guys. GBC is a huge supporter of the ATV, UTV industry, making some really great tires. I also have a set on my truck. So if you're looking for truck tires, they make a pretty good tire for that as well. Elka Suspension leading the way in every form of ATV racing and trying to take a chunk out of the UTV market. So if you're looking for a great ride, give Elka a call and they'll set you up. DBR Racing builds amazing little gadgets for your machine, from ECU holders to skid plates to Nerf bars to other componentry. So check out DBR Racing when you get a chance. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. And we're going to jump right in with Ed. Why don't you tell us who you are and what you do?
So I'm Ed Texera. I started off with some suspension work on ATVs and now moved into side-by-sides. So primarily focus on the chassis and suspension component side of it, not necessarily the shocks, but the hard parts.
If you could turn your volume up just a hair for us.
Ooh.
I was going to say, Ed, if you could scoot a little closer to your mic, that would be good.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to get cozy.
Yeah.
We're all good looking in the ATV industry.
I am new to Zoom. Where do I turn the volume up?
What kind of computer do you got?
What is it? Apple laptop. Oh, is that where it's at?
It's on the top bar on the right.
I thought you were talking actually on the screen. Well, it is maxed.
Yeah, just get close to it. That's the biggest thing.
All right. Okay. Did you catch that, or you want me to start over?
No, you're good. Go, just continue on with where did you come from as far as your background in ATVs?
So we had a family dairy. That's where I started. Raised and born and raised on the dairy until probably like my early 20s. I got into racing, old 250R. Picked one of those up and did some local motocross stuff. First race was, I believe, 92. I remember doing that at Marysville when, what was that, CMC was around, I believe. I think that's what it was. I went to the first race and Greg Stewart and Donovan Holland were there, and it's like, oh, wow, these guys, just amazing to see these guys, movie stars at the time. So I just did some motocross racing for a while, and then I hit the Mickeys, hooked up with Nick Granlund and Freddie Shepard way back in the day, and ended up doing, two Mickey Thompson races. I believe that was the year before they went belly up, and the following year I figured, yeah, I'm going to go all in and do the full series. And that's when they went belly up. I don't remember what they had, 3-4 races, and they shut down. It was 3 races. Okay. So yeah, that's I kind of started doing that, and I don't know, I raced until probably the late, about 96 roughly, and then got into jet skis, and then went back into quads. And when I did that, I'd always wanted to go desert racing. So that's kind of what kicked it off. I met up with a guy who had totaled was it a 2001 Raptor 660, I think? No. What's the first year that 660 come out? Was it 2001?
2001.
I think so.
2001.
Yeah, this guy had totaled it and wanted to sell it. And I was like, hey, here's my chance to go desert racing. But at the time, money was tight. So I figured I'm just going to build my own suspension components. He had pretty much total, he thrashed the A-arms, the axle, pretty much all the stuff you replace anyways. So that's how it started. I built myself a set of arms and went and desert raced, and then had another buddy that wanted a set, and kind of took off from there. Whole time I was, we were doing dairy industry is what we were doing.
That's quite the difference between a lot of us that start in the ATV industry.
Yeah. So that, what I didn't mention was during the time that I was doing Mickey's and that kind of, and some of the local motocross stuff, I had hooked up with Mike Halleck when he started Custom Axis. So I was doing some development for him at the time. And that's how I got into understanding the suspension, how it worked, the geometry, that kind of stuff. Halleck was just, for me, was just, the god with all the information. I just absorbed everything. I actually worked for him for a little short stint of time, part-time. So that's
smart.
Yeah, that's how I picked up on how to build the stuff and how it worked, the geometry, bump steer, all that stuff came from Mike.
That guy was a very, very smart dude.
Yeah.
One of the things that we wanted to talk about today is because you're one of the rare guys that does both. You actually work on ATVs and UTVs. And so Joe and I have multiple conversations about the strength of the ATV industry, the strength of the UTV industry, and some of the things that they're doing to one another or being done to one another that maybe you have a little different insight than we do on how to work with both of them.
Ooh, yeah. Coming from a manufacturer standpoint, from not the OEMs, but from developing parts, everybody has to make a living. And I think a lot of what's caused a lot of people to transfer from ATVs to UTVs and make their primary focus is a lot of it has to do with the income. There's a lot larger margins on UTV components. And so a lot of it, the UTV stuff or ATV stuff on the West Coast, as has really died off. So I think a lot of people are transferring to UTVs because some of the top guys can definitely make more money there.
Is it all about the margins? Because you still build both, and you seem to still have a hand in both industries.
Yeah, over the last couple of years, I've seen a pretty big drop off. At least for me, for Texera Tech, I've seen a pretty big drop off in the ATV stuff.
Really,
the last 2 years. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's happening to everybody, but that's what's happening to me. And so I've had to push more and more into the UTV market to stay busy.
How much of that do you think is economy versus people going back to work? Because I know that we all got busier to a point during the flu season when we all got to stay home.
Yeah,
well, I did, but some people did.
I'm sure that has something to do with it. I think another part of it is, as that Honda's discontinued a lot of Honda parts, 450R parts. So that's probably causing a lot of my drop off because my biggest market was Honda. So
right.
And I've got kind of a spin-off question on that. How much of it do you think is the fact that there are way more sport models in side-by-sides right now, and there is a constant release of new machines in the side-by-side segment? So how much do you think of the loss in demand or transfer in demand from one to the other have come from a lack of offerings from the OEMs?
I'm sure that has a big part to do with it. I mean, what's your choice now? Yamaha, and Yamaha. That's about it.
Yeah.
So,
750.
I'm sure there's a lot of old school people, that, Honda doesn't have anything. Forget it. I'm not buying a Yamaha. I can't stand Yamaha. There's some of that a lot of people don't care, but some of the older generation, Honda was the way to go for so long, and some of them are stuck on Honda, so they're not buying Yamaha, but I don't know.
I love Hondas, but
I
that
do,
Yamaha 450 and Raptor 700, they're both really, really good machines.
Yeah. So,
do you do much work on the Raptor 700?
not yet, but according to Joe, I will soon.
Right, right.
So no,
You
I
know,
haven't. I had the old, so I did have suspension for the old YZ 450, the carburetor model, and I know that a lot of that will transfer over, but I gotta. My stuff's come, it's improved over time as you build stuff, you make it better and better. So I don't want to release the old stuff. I want to go back to the drawing board and update before I release that stuff again, and then make it fit the Raptor the Raptor 700.
based on your involvement back east with the cross country series, what are you thinking of the enthusiasm and excitement for ATVs back there?
It's a whole nother world compared to what we got out here on the West Coast. You know what the entries are back there. What are they getting in the GNCC? 400, 500 something. I don't even know. I know it's big compared to what we got here. That's been my biggest ATV market for probably since 2000. Since I got into it, which was probably there 2008 or 9 or something. My sales over there are 90% compared to 10% West Coast.
Oh,
Is there
you can have 200 entries here at a local cross country, not even a GNCC. You can have,
Yeah.
150, 200 guys show up to race big bikes.
It would be great if we had even half of that on the West Coast, but we don't, and I don't know what it would take to get it.
cost of living is higher out here?
Yeah,
The closures in so many places to ride. There's less tracks. I mean, it's the relationship to it is there's not as many places to ride them here, and the leaders in most of the local governments don't want ATVs, motorcycles, and UTVs used in their areas. So I think that's something that the people need to stand up and fight for it. But Arizona has slowed down a little bit on some of their abilities to ride as well, which also hurt the West Coast market. Works is putting up a pretty good fight. They're trying really hard, but it's just not enough because it's like District 38, which is an hour from me, hour and 15 minutes from me. They're having a race today, and the numbers are dismal.
yeah. Up here by me, it's pretty much non-existent. So there's a little local series, and I'd say they're lucky if they get 10 quads. They run the quads and the side by sides, but there's hardly any quads that show up. So
yeah, I remember you could go back and look at some of the videos they made, and there was 1,000 motorcycle entries, and you're getting 150 quads, at the local district race here, which was incredible.
yeah,
And now it's,
Adelanto used to be amazing.
yeah,
Yeah,
it did. I mean, you'd get people coming from the East Coast wanting to ride it, and the whole street. You remember that when they started us on the asphalt,
yeah,
they had to make new lines because you had too many ATVs coming out to race, and it was great. We had clients coming from Portugal and all over the world to watch the guys race because they were going to go to the specific building companies and buy product. And that's one of the West Coast races they would choose to go watch, and that just doesn't happen anymore.
no.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. So on the West Coast, are your UTV sales higher and keeping the West Coast industry alive for you?
I have a few on the West Coast, a handful of them, but most of them are probably, kind of Texas, in that whole area, that races like MAO, that kind of stuff. I got a handful on the West Coast, but not as many as I'd like. So I got to make a push. I haven't made that big of a push. It's kind of just my market's kind of followed my sponsored riders, and right now, you probably know I'm helping out the Miller brothers, so a lot of my sales are wherever those guys travel. They've been amazing as far as making sales for me. So it kind of
very talented guys. I like the way their car works. I watched some videos, and it's almost poetry in motion.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they've done a great job of getting their car set up.
Do
So
you
go ahead.
go
Go
ahead?
ahead, Mike. I was just gonna kind of dive into that a little bit. Like, one thing that Tech's done over the past, few years was, they were one of, if not the first company to go into production on front ends that move the shock mounts from the upper A arm to the lower A arm. And, that was a big leg up for the Millers. And, a lot of people who are listening, like, until Ed explained it to me, it was like, okay, what are the advantages of moving that shock mount to the lower A arm? Because, it's a little bit more expensive setup to do it. The arms cost more money to build than just a standard replacement setup. And now you're starting to see the factories, go to that design. They're not going there with the same level of build quality, but I mean, that's a good thing that I think I'd like to hear Ed touch on is, what's the story on the next level front ends on the side by sides, because they do work really well and everybody who drives them feels that way. What are what were the big challenges and what are the big advantages to doing it?
Biggest challenge was just to figure out a way to get around the axle. I mean, I'm not going to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. I wasn't the first guy to do that. Holtz, as everybody knows, he was doing a kit for the desert, which I was always intrigued by. I thought it was a great idea, but you had to send your frame to Holtz and have him, he had to move the steering rack to the front. It was pretty involved setup. And so I looked at his kit a couple of times. I was like, man, there's got to be a way to do this and to just let the normal Joe Blow guy bolt it on in his garage. So that was my main focus behind that. And moving the shock to the bottom arm, we all know, coming from the ATV world, that's just the way it should have been from the beginning. All quads were that way. I didn't understand why side-by-sides weren't that way. So I dove into it, looking into it, like, man, there's a way to do this. And the way was to bring the A-arm up to the shock. I didn't want a guy to have to go buy a whole nother set of shocks. I'm like, man, we got to do it so that, they can use the stock shocks. Obviously, you're going to have to respring and revalve. That's a given. There was no way around that. So I figured, hey, we just bring the A-arm up to the shock instead of trying to get the shock down to the A-arm. And so that's where it came from. And we know, putting all that weight on the bottom of the spindle, that tire's going to drive into the corners harder. You're not trying to push on the top of the tire and lean out. You want to drive all those forces in a straight line into that corner. So that's where that came from. It wasn't rocket science. Everybody knew that was better. Just nobody had done it. Nobody had done a bolt-on kit that you could just bolt on in your garage.
So let me ask you this. When you put that shock on the lower arm and that takes pressure off of your knuckle, spindle, whatever you want to call it, so now we're going to have less breakage problems with that part?
Yeah, you've got less breakage problems. So like on the X3, the spindle has been designed to take the load on top. So it is beefier on top than on the bottom. The Polarises are fine. They use steel knuckles. So you could move the weight to the bottom and you're fine. But on the X3, that model that's got an aluminum knuckle, that one, you have to buy an aftermarket knuckle to run the kit. But besides that, talking about these other models, yeah, you're going to have better durability. Everything's going to last longer when you're driving this. You're not trying to put forces on the top of the wheel and move everything funky directions. And you're transferring the weight to the bottom of the spindle rather than on top. So you're also you got less feedback through the steering. This is all feedback I've gotten from all my racers. And some of this stuff I didn't expect. But better cornering, better stability, less rollover, tires are, more traction. So everything, more predictable steering.
So does that lengthen the shock or allow you to run a longer shock? And I know you're limited on your axle motion, but you know, it seems to me like you would be able to run a better suspension setup the way you've designed it.
Yes, you can run way better suspension. You know, with the shock being on the top arm, by the time you get close to bottoming out, your shock's almost laying horizontal. So you've reduced your shaft speed. So in essence, yes, your spring is getting compressed. So the shock is getting stiffer. But since your shaft speed is slowing down, you're losing that oil flow through your shims on the stack. So really, your valving is getting lighter. The closer you get to bottoming out, your valving is lightening. Your progression ratio is slowing down. So you have to run stiffer springs on a stock setup. You have to run stiffer springs to keep your machine from bottoming out. So when you transfer the shock to the bottom A-arm, now that the shock is standing more straight up and down, you maintain your shaft travel, so you can run lighter valving, lighter springs, and therefore you get better traction. When you get better traction, you're going to get better steering in the corners, more predictable.
So that allows for, in the videos, you see the flotation and the movement of the front end that I was talking about in the beginning of the video.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Let's shift gears just a little bit. And Joe and I were having a discussion before the show started about the difference, and we're going to go to an ATV now. So when we put a different set of shocks on the front of an ATV, let's just say we're going to go with stock A-arms or a cross-country set of A-arms and put a set of quality shocks, Elkas, on there. And we take our rear shock with the stock link and revalve it. Can the rear shock keep up with our upgraded front end?
That would depend on what you've got on the rear end. So say, like, let's talk about the Honda 450R, the 04.
We'll base this on a 400EX. How's that?
400EX.
We were discussing that, or the cross country build that you and I have been discussing, Ed.
That would come down to the shock guy. If he can get that rear end to absorb as well as a long traveled front end. So here's my thoughts on it. And somebody else may think differently, but when I set up a quad, I like the rear suspension to bottom out anywhere between a 1/2 inch to 1 inch with the tires higher than the front. So if you hit some sort of kicker, I would rather my front end kick and float and the rear end absorb and stay down. If your front end bottoms out, absorbs more, I'll call it up travel. So if your front tires have more up travel than the rear, the front end could soak something up and the rear end's going to kick this kicker that you just hit, and it's going to knock you over the front. So when I race desert, that's the way I like to set my stuff up. I like the rear end to have about 1 inch more up travel than the front. And so if you can do that with the 400EX with the stock setup, then I'm sure you can get it to work fine. But if your front end's going to soak the bumps up and your rear end's not, I'd rather not have that, so that I'm not flying over.
So the likelihood of that happening is marginal.
It's marginal. I haven't spec'd out the 400EX enough to know if you can pull that off or not. With the standard rear end. I know you can do it with, I built my daughter a cross country 400EX, and we slapped my 450R linkage on the back of it, and an 06 450R swing arm, all that stuff on the back. And so then I know we could pull it off with that, but I haven't spec'd out the stock setup.
Okay. So with all the 06 Honda parts bouncing around out there, you could find them relatively cheap enough to take your 400EX cross country normal man's build without spending astronomical dollars and adapt that to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you gain some extra wheelbase, which is nice.
There you go, Joe. Just solved your issues, man.
Yeah, 450R swing arm. The 06 is about 7/8 of an inch longer than the stock 400EX swing arm.
And that it takes push out of it. And also with that setup, you're going to get more travel in the shock as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because then you can fit an 18.25 inch shock back there.
Nice.
That's pretty long for a Honda.
There you go. Joe, we just upgraded you and you didn't even know it.
Wow. I wouldn't say it solves all my issues. That's going to require psychological help, but
well, Ed and I are not certified in that department, so I do not think that we're going to be able to solve that. Lord knows we probably talked to you enough to try, but okay. I mean, come on.
Right.
So that was great, Ed. I really like the way that you explained that, because I would have not wanted to put those parts on there, but now that you've said that, I might be more inclined to do something along those lines to allow my 400EX customers to have a better ride. How is that going to work in the desert?
It'll be fine. Increased wheelbase. I'm not sure what other companies do, but our front arms are on the 400EX are an inch forward. So adding that swing arm, you just lengthen the wheelbase a couple inches. And if I'm not mistaken, that's getting closer to the 450 wheelbase of some of the 450 sport quads. I think the 400EX is what? Is it an inch or two shorter than a 450R? I'm not positive.
I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to get delved into it. I usually rely on the people such as yourself to give me those answers.
Well, I think it's somewhere around there, and 50, 51 inch wheelbase for desert's pretty good.
Yeah, I think the stock YFZ 450R, which has a very adequate length swing arm for, I think, most types of racing. I think the wheelbase on that bike is 50.5.
Okay. And so I think this would bring the 400EX closer to that, the combination of the A-arms and the swing arm.
So how in-depth have you gotten with the YFC 450R?
I've gotten pretty in-depth for the cross-country guys, but not the West Coast guys. I did have a setup a while back, but I wasn't too happy with it. So I've had a handful of calls on getting some 50-inch stuff going. So maybe that happens this summer.
And you haven't developed the Raptor 700 stuff, or now that Joe's beating up on you, is this something that you're going to do?
Yeah, now it's something I need to do. I don't think what I built for the 450 carburetor model is the same thing you want for the Raptor 700. I think it needs to be different. So I need to dig into it. I haven't dug into it enough. I know a lot of guys are taking what they built for the 450 and just slapping it on the 700, but I'm too much of a, I don't know what you want to call me, a perfectionist. It needs to be right. I'm not just throwing something on there.
And that's great. I love that. I think that 700 platform is ultimately going to take over on the West Coast desert racing program, because the strength of the engine. Some people are telling me they're having frame issues. I have yet to see frame issues.
I'm
not saying that they're not there, but I haven't seen them.
Okay. Oh, I haven't researched the frames to see if they're having problems.
That was something that I'd heard from Corey Ellis. I believe he said that there can be a tendency for the rear part of the frame above where the foot pegs bolt up to crack. Again, I don't think it's a common thing. I don't think it's something that the average guy is doing. Yeah, it's a rumor. I don't know that it's a major issue, because you just don't hear about the regular guys complaining about it.
Something to look at.
I was also wondering, are you thinking when you do the 700, are you thinking about a different linkage for the machine?
Yeah, for sure. That's one area I definitely want to focus on. I've got some ideas I don't want to release right now, but I do have some ideas on how to. It'd be nice for desert to get 11 inches or more of travel back there. I'm not sure what guys are getting after they redo their shocks. I haven't researched that, but something back there a bit different is what I have in mind.
I'm not sure myself, but I think that the platform as it is now without a link works very well with, I work with Doug Roll, this, and
Yeah.
he's got a package I think that works phenomenal. Elka's doing pretty good because they transfer some of the information they get from all of you guys into the shocks that they're doing. And so far, so good. Also, Felipe Velez down in San Felipe is doing some work on the Raptor and trying to do some development. The chassis, the build setup, the concept, minus the gas tank, is all coming along great. The only gas tanks we can get come out of Argentina, and you have to go there to get it. So you have to know somebody that can get you a gas tank and then ship it to you.
You can order them on eBay.
Yeah,
I haven't seen anybody get one yet. And so once we find somebody that's received one from eBay, then we'll run that avenue. But I have not been able to get my hands on one or have anybody get their hands on one through any other aspect other than through somebody in Argentina. So I'm not calling you a liar, Joe. It's just I haven't seen that yet. So if anybody's out there in the chat and they've gotten one, hey, rattle my chain, because I need a line for that to develop that machine as a racer, especially on the West Coast.
And you think the gas tank's the main reason it hasn't taken off in desert racing more?
In desert racing, yes, because you can never get enough fuel.
Okay.
I think that the front end quality is there. I think the motor package overall, with minor mods, you're taking the thing to a level that the 450s will never go. You go Vegas to Reno. Okay, how often are you wide open? Most of the race.
Yeah.
Okay, and if I'm anywhere from 8 to 12 mile an hour faster on top speed, the 450 is never going to beat me because the tight technical sections aren't enough to compensate. And Joe can attest to this. When you ride that 700 in full dress in a package that, or even stock, it's not a bad bike. It handles well. It does so many good things. And it's only 30 pounds heavier than a 450 Yamaha.
Mm-hmm.
You know this as well as I do, Ed. When you're building a desert race TRX 450R, you're adding weight.
Yeah.
So, Joe, are you going to chime in on any of this? You're just going to let me rattle?
No, Leon rode our Raptor. Leon Spiden, who's a mechanic for Jane Launderville at the ATV Nationals, and Leon races as well. I don't think he would be offended by me saying that his rider is a little better rider than he is, but he gets to ride a lot of cool stuff that's fully race built, and he came out and rode our little 700RR project. We had a suspension. We had Rocket Ron redo our stock suspension. We did them by Race Tech for the first build that we did, which didn't set it up as a zero preload setup. And then we kind of wanted to try that bike slammed lower. So we sent the shocks back out to Rocket Ron, had him revalve them, respring them, drop the bike. And we did a day shooting on a motocross track. And, we didn't compare it to a built YFZ. We're not talking about a kitchen sink build. We're just talking about some, extended length, standard travel aftermarket A-arms with revalve stock shocks. It had a linkage and an axle in it. And yeah, he was surprised at how good it was. I think if you talk to Leon, he would tell you it probably exceeded his expectations of the way a Raptor handles compared to the stigma that surrounds that bike as just being 100 pounds heavier than a YFZ, and it's just not. Center of gravity is a little higher. You might feel that, but you can reduce it when you drop it, and it there's potential. And motocross, to me, we've tested that bike now in stock form probably 5 times through the year since it came out. And it's motocross is probably its weakest link if you were going to build it for a type of racing. That's probably one of the last disciplines where, you'd be like, okay, maybe this isn't the best bike for this, but cross country, desert racing, I think that bike's got a lot of potential for those forms, and it's just not being tapped into.
Well, it's a proven winner in Dakar. That is a brutally long race. They add a ton of weight to these machines. I don't see massive frame modifications to those to the machines that are racing down there, and the engines are in stock form, or it's a form with a mildly raised in compression and a cam with an exhaust and a ECU, are doing extremely good things and can go on the flats almost 100 miles an hour, if not 100 miles an hour.
Well, my test rider, and because I don't want to get it too far away from Ed here, but my test rider, Evan Hartzell, who races local pro cross country, he picked up my Raptor the other day to do a little work on it for us, just to kind of freshen it up for our next video we're going to do with it. So the oil change and skid plate stuff. And I told him, hey, take this thing out and take it for a spin, because he's never ridden a stock one. And he called me up and he's like, dude, I'm just shocked. It's so fast. Like, I think he said he thinks this stock Raptor is faster than his YFZ 450R that he doesn't have an intake on it because he doesn't have that new Fuel Customs cross country intake system for it that has a lid on the airbox to make it a little bit more water resistant. But he's got a vortex and a pipe. And he said, I think this Raptor would smoke my bike. And it's probably not far off in horsepower, and it's got way more torque. So, and that's a stock bike.
Right. Let's bring this back into Ed's wheelhouse. So we take a machine that's a little heavier with what I would consider a more planted chassis setup. When we're building for G outs and we're building for desert, because I know you have some good extensive desert background. What do you think that you could do for the desert rider?
As far as the suspension setup, I'd lengthen it. And for desert, I always like lengthening everything and widening it. So if all you're doing is desert, nothing else, I'd probably push the front end about an inch out, the swing arm about another inch or so. I'd have to, put it on scales and see what it's going to do, and get it out to maybe 50 to 52 inches wide, and get the suspension set up the way I talked about before, where the rear end comes up further than the front, and 11, 12 inches of travel. I think that'd be a nice solid setup for desert. Go ahead.
You're going to put that on your to-do list as far as coming up with a package that's going to lend itself for that market?
Yeah, it'd be directly oriented towards desert. It's not a setup you want to go race cross country with. Motocross can be a little bit too big, but yeah, I'll put that on the wheel. I'm not giving any time frames because things are a little crazy right now with getting all the help that I need in the shop to get all the projects done, that I have in the back of my head. But that's definitely something I'd like to do. Put somebody in the desert and see what they can do. I think it would be a dominating machine, with the horsepower that you're talking about. Yeah, if you get it set up, I'm sure it'll beat the 450.
With just a pipe and an ECU and an air intake, you don't even have to put an air intake system on there. You can put just a adaptive larger filter in the box.
Yeah.
And you can put a one size larger sprocket on there with 23 in the front and 22 in the rear with some good skid plates. And the thing's going to already have a better mile an hour than your built 450s.
Yeah. Yeah. What are you thinking? 10 miles an hour faster, maybe more?
So this is just my comparison. In Vegas to Reno a few years back, on the heading into the finish after about 500 miles, they unofficially clocked my TRX 450R with Mike Sloan on it at 88 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting pretty much into the area where you're not going to get, after 500 miles, if your bike's still going 88, you're doing something right. I believe in my heart that just with that 700 after 500 miles, that thing's just getting broke in, and you're going to be doing closer to the 95 to 98 mile an hour with limited mods, maybe even getting it to 100 in the same section, of course, on a fuel injected machine that's more efficient.
Yeah, with the elevation changes at Vegas to Reno, you're gonna stay in the peak a lot longer.
Exactly. So you take that same section with two riders, the two different machines, and if I can go that much faster on that 700, even a rider the caliber of Mike Sloan or Josh Rowe, there's no comparison. You can bring Danny Prather, Doug Eichner, Dave Scott, you can bring all these guys back, and they're not going to compete with a moderate style rider that can go that much faster.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the writing's on the wall if people choose to force the development.
Yeah.
I mean, right now, Brett Greenholtz and his partner are the guys at Legacy that are doing well. They've done well at a few of the best in the desert races. And, they're looking into the platform because the 0405 Honda that most everybody desires for the desert is, you can't buy cases, you can't buy training gears. What are you going to do?
Yeah. I got a couple sitting here. I'm going to wait a few more years, and then they're going to be worth triple.
Hoarding cards.
Yeah. Exactly. I know my brother's bought some stuff and put it on the shelf for builds that we're going to do. He's looking into developing or hoarding. Thanks, Joe. Some 06 up parts that are hard to get as well. I mean, it's crazy. If you have to think back, Ed, on the industry and the sport quad industry itself,
mm-hmm.
I don't think the ATV industry is dying. I have a total different perspective based on what I do every day. But your perspective based on your sales, would a new 450 sport machine help save the industry on the West Coast as well as everywhere else?
I think so. Yeah. I think having one choice is not good for the industry. At least 2, 3 would be better. I don't know if we need 6, but I think at least 2 or 3 would be good, and I think it would help the industry quite a bit.
And that's funny because I've sort of been leading the charge in the media because I have direct contact, face-to-face meetings with, a lot of these manufacturers on an annual basis, for media ride events and stuff like that. And that's one reason, looking back to the second boom of sport quads in the, the early mid 2000s, from 2004 to 2008, 2009, it was overpopulated. And that's why I just tell Honda point blank, like, hey, you say you don't want to do it. Okay, well, if we get 2 more players in the game besides Yamaha, then please don't change your mind, because we don't want to get over that tipping point again where there's too many fish in the pond and then all the fish starve to death except one. So, yeah, I think I'm with Ed, like 3. I think 3 is the number. For at least as far as building a high performance competition machine. And other than that, then just go chase Polaris.
Yeah.
I love that. I want to shift gears a minute on you. I didn't want to stop that portion of the discussion, but you know who Mike Walsh is, obviously. You know, he's a builder in the industry. What do you believe, or what do you feel about his concept of building a chassis that I can adapt 450s or 250s of the modern day motorcycles into it with motor mount kits and intake kits? What do you think of that concept?
I think that's good. I think it's a good chunk of money up front. But in the long run, if you're planning on I'm strictly speaking of racing. If you're planning on staying in the industry racing for years to come, in the long run, it will save you money. You know, so you can just swap out the motor and move on to the next class. So I think it's a good idea. I mean,
if his shock and A-arm locations are in the right place, would you build product that would bolt onto those chassis?
That's a good question. I guess it would depend on how it took off. If it took off, I mean, I think it would be a good idea if he was to maybe market it to the masses, because some companies have the capability and some don't or don't even have the manpower to make whole complete quads like he's basically doing. So if he could market a chassis package and maybe sell it to other manufacturers, I'd be interested in maybe take his frame package and then put my own spin on the rest of the components, stems, swing arms, A-arms. Yeah.
And I had a feeling talking to Mike and hearing about it. I mean, Ed probably already makes things that would bolt to it, because I didn't hear him talking about changing the front end geometry, changing the geometry with the steering. It seemed like what he was doing was basically different, parts for the back of the cradle, top of the cradle, just the things that make the motor bolt in. So I think sounds like, from what Mike was saying, people who already have product developed for the YFZR would probably work with that package already. Could be wrong.
Yeah, I don't know the details of his of the package that he's making. I don't know if it's 100% OEM mounting points or if he's changed any of that stuff. That would matter also.
I believe, based on what Joe just said, that he was going with the YFZR locations.
Okay.
And just adapting the engine and the intake so that you could use your spindles, your steering stem, things like that over again, and you wouldn't have to be buying completely new components. As far as an industry saver, I had a discussion with my brother about it, who I love him to death, but I can never get him to sit down with me on the show. He thought that, for hybrid racing, that would be the way to go.
Yeah.
Drops the cost and, it keeps everybody relevant. So yes, we're using a Walsh base, but we're using Ed Textera front end with a, somebody's rear end, whoever's making the swing arms for it, and, our JB swing arm. And we have our package that we like, and we want to go race motocross, cross country, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Joe.
Last year, because I wanted to kind of touch on, some of what Ed has done. Like I've used through the years on a lot of different builds. We've used Lone Star. I used Timmy Boy designs back when he was a thing. We've used Hauser components. We've used, Textera Tech components on a lot of our builds, especially our little bit higher end, more expensive, more boutique builds. We've chosen his stuff. I know, last year Cole Richardson did his, I guess, last full-time series in GNCC, and he made the switch to Ed's stuff last year. I believe he was third overall in the series, third or fourth. Like, it was one of his stronger years. So I think there's a lot of people out here that may or may not grasp that all these suspension guys, chassis guys, they do stuff a little differently. So I was kind of wondering if Ed could we're not obviously trying to say that, somebody else is doing something wrong, but like, Ed, what are some of the key things that you think you're doing? Obviously I like your parts. I want to run them on my own bikes that I own personally because I know they're good. But what do you feel you're doing that's different that gives you a leg up, and like the way you build your arms, um, versus maybe what some other people are doing? Obviously, we're not trying to throw any salt at them, but what do you do that makes you different, that makes you high end and unique?
I don't know what other, I'm not in other people's shops seeing what they're doing. I'm very hands-on, so I'm probably too picky, is what I've been told by some people, but I'm looking over probably 99% of the parts that come out of our shop. I'm looking at the welds, making sure that the welds are tip top notch. Um, I'm picky. I'm picky. If the stuff's not perfect, do it over. It needs to be as perfect as possible coming out of my shop. Occasionally, like every shop, something may get by that's unexpected. But that's typically what I do. The leverage ratios, I don't know what other guys are doing for leverage ratios. I know what mine are, and I keep them at this. I have different leverage ratios, whether you're in the desert, motocross, any cross country. They're all slightly different. I'm not just cookie cutter, pick one and go. So, and then I work real close with all of our top pro racers. Jared McClure. Jared McClure says, "Hey, Ed, if you did this here a little different, I think it would be better, or it would be easier to install, or better for the end user. As soon as I can, I'll make the change. As long as it's, it makes sense. So I don't just make a part, it's done, and I never touch it again for the next 5 or 10 years. I'm constantly trying to improve, and I take all that feedback from all of our top racers, that whatever it is, and I take it all into account. So I don't know what other, like I said, don't know what other guys are doing, but I don't just make a part and leave it alone. If I can make it better, I will. I'll make a Gen 2 or a Gen 3 or Gen 4 if I have to. So that's some of the things I kind of take pride in doing. It does sometimes cause us to have longer lead times. If, as to make a change on a fixture or something, now it takes a little bit longer for the next batch, but that's the stuff I'm doing. Everything we do is 100% 4130 Pro Moly. I don't throw any mild steel anywhere. So everything's tip top notch. And unfortunately, it increases the end user's price, but that's where I want to be. I want to be the tip top, of the market. And there's a market for every level of product. So it's not like it's one way or no way. There's a market for everybody, a price point for everybody. I don't know if that answered your question, but
Well, it does, and I think you're being a little nicer, and since that's probably good for you. I don't have to be. I think I see these guys and they'll go out and they'll get a YFZ 450R, or they'll go get a TRX 450R, just insert high quality sport quad, and then they'll go out and they'll go to a company who gets import Chinese A-arms and they bolt them on their bike. And it's like, yeah, it's wider. And they told me I can run my stock shocks. All I need is this relocator bracket. And, it blows my mind. Like, if you want to buy cheap crap, buy cheap wheels. You're going to beat the crap out of them. They're going to bend. And if you bend a cheap wheel, you buy a new wheel, where it's like, the last place as somebody in the media, because I don't like ATV injuries, the last place I want to see somebody skimping on what they're spending money is on that front end. And again, there are some companies that build less expensive stuff in the States that's not quite as cool as what you build, because I know you do some different stuff with your caster adjustment system, and you are one of the only companies, and this is something that a lot of people don't know, like there's not many companies that are building additional ground clearance A-arms for the YFZ 450R. And I watch all these guys in cross country, except like Cole Richardson last year, he's showing up with your stuff, and And I know he said that his bike was getting through the ruts better because of the added ground clearance that your arms have. But my point is that there's different quality grades, and I don't feel like there's a place for everybody when it comes to building chassis parts, because a catastrophic front end failure will land you in the hospital. So it's like, if you can't afford to buy decent quality suspension components, don't. You're better off with stock than going to some Chinese import $400 set of A-arms just because it's wider.
That's something you just mentioned that you touched on that I didn't mention. I don't know why nobody, I'm not going to say nobody because I don't know everybody that's out there, but out of the big players, I don't understand why there isn't more companies with ground clearance A-arms for the YFZ 450R for cross country. I don't quite know what happened. On the Honda, it was almost everybody. So that's, funny.
I don't know how to answer that either, but I did have a question about when you build your arms, swing arms, are you worried about overall weight?
I am. So my background, as I told you in the beginning, motocross, Mickey Thompson, CMC, all that stuff. So I'm very weight conscious with all of my products. Even though for cross country and desert, you really don't care, I just can't get that out of the back of my head. So I'm always throwing in gussets in any way that I can to run the lightest material possible. So I am weight conscious. I did have a learning curve with side-by-sides. Those those need to be built a bit more robust, but I do put weight as a consideration into every product I make.
So strength first, then weight, or weight first, then strength?
Well, it depends on what I'm building. So upper A-arms on a on a quad, weight first, then strength. But I don't build them to where I think they're going to bend. I honestly, I can probably count on one hand how many upper A-arms of mine that people have bent in cross country. And it probably usually has to do with a tree contact. So
they don't move.
They don't move. So when it comes to lowers on a quad, probably 50-50. Weight, strength. And I think I've got those dialed pretty well. Early on, I did have a couple of them crack. We made a couple changes. I haven't had a single crack since. And the change that I made on those lowers had to do with gusseting. The weight didn't change. I just had to move things around. So I kept the same weight, and I haven't had a problem since. You get into side-by-sides. So my next level stuff with the shock on the bottom A-arm is a whole different animal from the OEM replacement stuff. So on the next level stuff, the upper A-arm is kind of like a 50-50 strength versus weight. And then on the lower A-arm, on those next level A-arms, it's strength first and then weight. So it depends on what part I'm dealing with.
Right. Good analogy of how that works. So in at the end of the show, we're going to veer off from ATVs and UTVs a bit and talk a little bit of other racing that went on in the world, being that we are a motorsports show. F1 went with round one. If you guys are F1 fans, unfortunately, the Red Bull car went wire to wire. MotoGP is getting ready to kick off next weekend. And we had the Daytona Supercross, which the first round of the motocross is happening on Tuesday. So everybody needs to tune in for all your shows for that. We'll be doing a pre-race report on Monday with Leon, talking about the track conditions, weather conditions, and what to expect in those specific classes that are running there. And we had our second round of our GNCC that went off yesterday in the ATV world, with Jessica Elioff winning Brandon Frazier won. Kyle Gross from the West Coast won the XC2 class, which I was shocked to see, but a West Coaster came out east and did some damage out there. And Bryson Neal with Walker Fowler in tow in the XC1 class. So there's a lot of great things happening. Round 3 of the works was last weekend. We'll be doing some information on that as well. Ed, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I know you and I have had very little interaction, but I think that's going to change. I like what you're talking. I like what you're selling, and we'll be in contact. I'd love to get you on the regular podcast to talk ATVs and get in depth a little further with some of your history and the things that you've got to do. Joe, as always, brother, thank you so much for coming on, and your silent direction is always welcome.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks for having me. Love talking four-wheelers. If I wasn't doing it on your podcast, I'd probably just be on the phone talking to you about them, or Ed or Jeff or Al or somebody. So, might as well hang out and talk to a larger audience.
Yeah, Ed, if you don't mind, I got one more question for you, show related, and this is going to put you on the spot a little bit. TV preference: YFCR, TRX 450R, 06 up.
You're asking me?
Yep.
My preference? YFZR or 06 and up?
Yeah, YFZ 450R, 06 and up Honda TRX 450R.
That'd be a lot easier if you said 0405.
I didn't say 0405 on purpose.
I'd probably go YFZR.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I get it.
Would you like to opine? Like, what's your reasoning? Just curious.
I got a lot of time on an 0405. I'll say that. But on an 06, I probably rode an 06 a handful of times. And I noticed a huge difference in the handling in the 06, and I didn't like it. That being said, now I'm talking straight from the factory. If I could swap spindles and a handful of other things on that 06, then I'd probably pick the 06. But if I couldn't touch anything, I'd pick the YXER. And that's probably why. Handling, suspension, the whole bit. The Honda took more work to get it to where I liked it.
Okay. I like it. I like it. Gentlemen, I want you to enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And thank you again so much, Ed, for coming and sitting down and talking with us. We really appreciate it. Check your email. I'll be sending you out some information. Joe, we look forward to your next video, whether it be on a ATV or in a UTV. I appreciate
well, we've got I think hopefully I can pressure John Pellin to finish the three-wheeler interview this week. I've got a 200X project we shot a few months ago. I'm kind of at a sticking point now where I need to film. I need to get some work done that I filmed. Other than that, I have to go film more stuff to make more videos. So three-wheeler projects coming very soon. There's going to be people that have waited a decade for it, and they're going to be like, oh, really? Finally? So, yeah, I'll be excited to get that one done. And our last 200X stock test is about to hit 1 million views. So that's exciting, too.
That's awesome that there's so many people checking it out. On ATV Talk this week, on Tuesday, you'll be able to catch Bryce Ford on the audio podcast. We will also be having a bench prep conversation live on Instagram on Wednesday. Your YouTube drops will come with your race reports on Friday. Check for your live Instagram shows for your pre-races, one on Monday with Leon and on Friday with Cody Collier, again, getting ready for the Georgia round. Gentlemen, is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
I appreciate you having me on. It was a good time. Look forward to the next time.
Excellent. Joe, what day is that three-wheeler video coming out?
I don't have a date yet, but I'm still waiting on John to film his interview, John Pellin from ATV Scene, and then I'll be on it next week. Next week I'll be going to Georgia to hang out with Yamaha and talk about the 20th anniversary of the YFZ 450. So, that's, as a sport quad lover, first and foremost, that's a big deal to me. So that's what's coming up in the immediate future for us. And the Kawasaki Ridge that we discussed last week on the show, I dropped that test on UTV On Demand's channel yesterday. So if you're looking for a hardworking side by side with some sport utility performance, you might want to go check that video out. I apologize, I didn't get to film the test. They had a videographer there who is not as good as me, so sorry.
Gotta love Joe's always putting himself out there. I gotta love it, brother. Elka Suspension, GBC tires, check them out. If you're looking to go to the front, those are the items you need to run on your machine. And DBR Racing. Gentlemen, have an amazing day, and thank you guys so much for your time. We'll talk to you later.
All right.
Thanks, sir.
All right, man.